Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our weekly series of shirim on the Mitteler Rebbe's Shaar HaYichud, and we're holding by Parak Yud Dalid. We've gotten up to the Tzimtzum and the Rishimu, and now Parak Yud Dalid is going to describe the extension of the Kav or Ein Sof, the ray of infinite light that descends down from the Rishimu to populate the Chalal. And as the Mitteler Rebbe does, he folds all of the worlds into the minimal words which he is providing us with in each and every one of these prakim to really collapse the entirety of the Seder HaShtalshelus into minimal forms of information so that when a person is learning Shaar HaYichud, they're grasping the entire Seder HaShtalshelus. And therefore, each word demands attention and each word demands diuk, and each word is specific to a wondrous degree. Nevertheless, for the sake of moving forward and getting the thematic structure of the book in front of us, and Emergence Hashem returning back to it again and again so that we can weaponize these ideas and create the medicinal forms of immediate forms of his boinenus and his boididus and emuna. So for now, we're going to get just the larger picture. So we're going to go through Parak Yud Dalid in one fell swoop, Be'ezras Hashem, even though it deserves 4 or 5 weeks to go through, much more than that. Be'ezras Hashem. Okay, Parak Yud Dalid from the Mitteler Rebbe. So now we've gotten up to the point where there's an empty space, there's a Chalal Panui, and within that Chalal Panui, what remains is the Rishimu or Ein Sof, which we said is not the absence of God, but the collapsing of all of God's potency, so to say, and condensing it into one particular point, which holds everything. So everything is still there. It's just there in a way of concealment, so that even though the Roishem is not the essence of the infinite light any longer, the miracle of the Tzimtzum is that even after the Tzimtzum, there is an irreducible trace within that quintessential point of essence that contains all of the potency of the light of the infinite in its essence. And we also said that the Rishimu does create a distinction, meaning we're not just saying that Tzimtzum doesn't happen. The radical secret of the Rishimu is how we can say that Tzimtzum happened and didn't happen at the same time. How we can say it's Tzimtzum, but it's also in a Kapshuto. And Rabbi Nachman in Torah Samach Dalet is the one who really develops the language for this grasp of Tzimtzum. But the distinction that takes shape is that Mitzido Yisbarach, from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Tzimtzum doesn't create any element of concealment because the essential nature of the infinite light is still there. Just as Lamashal, the potency of the teacher's awareness of the teachings are still there, even when they are conveying the wisdom in a particular pointed way so that the student can grasp it. It doesn't mean that the wisdom is gone. The proof of that being that the wisdom can be retained at any given moment without durational delay, but it's contained in the intensification of its capacity to hold itself by way of privation and snius and hold back that informs the place of the Rishimu. So mitzad ha'elyon, there's no distinction, but mitzad ha'tachton, all that we can grasp by way of abstraction up the line of Seder Shtalshlus is the Rishimu or Ein Sof, which by us is something that is separate, one step removed from the essence of the infinite light itself. So that for us, the highest level of grasp, mitzidenu, when we climb back up, it's going to be the darkness of the Rishimu, which is ukam klape ilas ha'alos, which is black in correspondence, in comparison to the illumination that precedes it. But mitzido yisbarach, from the tzad ha'elyon, there is no distinction. Beseder. Me'ata yesh lahavin b'chinas kav v'hachut. Now that we've explained the Rishimu that populates the Chalal Panui, it is incumbent upon us to understand the matter of the Kav and the Chut. The Arizal tells us that after the Tzimtzum, that what is revealed is the Chalal Panui, which is the Rishimu. Eitz Chaim doesn't bring the language of the Rishimu necessarily, but Mavo Sharim does, and it's implicit within Eitz Chaim. But in that Rishimu, what emerges next is the Kav or Ein Sof. The language of Eitz Chaim doesn't say Kav v'chut, but chut is the externalization, the chitzonius hakav, which serves to garb the innermost potency of the Kav. But the Kav and the chut, the Kav or Ein Sof, the measured ray of infinite light comes back down and it populates the Chalal. Where does this Kav come from? The Kav is nimshach me bechirunas hamrishimu hanisker la'el, derech prat. So when we talk about the reintroduction of infinite light back into the Chalal HaPanui, and we say that God reveals his infinite light as it was before the Tzimtzum back into the void of after the Tzimtzum, the truth of the matter is that the Kav or Ein Sof is emergent from within the Rishimu itself. Because as we said, and as the Mitteler Rebbe is going to explain, the Rishimu is the essential light of the essence of infinitude prior to concealment, but it reveals itself in such a way that mitzido Yisbarach, from the upper perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no distinction between the Rishimu and the essence of the light, because the Rishimu holds within itself the essence of the light. It's only by way of the recipient, the student, the perspective of mitzidenu, that is going to receive that pointed nature of the quintessential expression of infinitude in a pointed way, and not the full and extended revelation of infinitude without concealment. So this Rishimu, even though it's limited by way of our grasp, is still unlimited by way of its essence, and therefore what we're saying is that the Kav or Ein Sof is what's being revealed from within the Rishimu, that the Rishimu is already the beginning of the reintroduction or the remnant of infinite light that remains in the void. And then from that Rishimu, what gets extended is going to be the Kav or Ein Sof that comes back down. This just goes to show us and to really drive home the nature of this Rishimu, that on a certain element, this Rishimu is the miracle of all miracles to the degree that it's both infinite and finite at once. It's the Koyach HaGvul B'Bilti Gvul, which gets expressed in an even further and wondrous way by the Kav itself, because the Kav is a measured form of infinitude. How is it possible to have a measured form of infinitude? If it's infinite, it denies the possibility of measure. Elamah, the secret of the Rishimu is that we can speak of the nature of infinitude folding itself into the into finite, because that finite from our perspective is the Rishimu, even though it's still an expression of the infinite. So when we say we're drawing down the Kav or Ein Sof, it's being nimshach from that light of the Rishimu that remains. Derech Prat. But now it's more of a particularization of the Rishimu. The Kav is drawing down the potency of the Rishimu that remains in the Chalal Hatzimtzum, but drawing it down into particularization. Yesh loymar boy be'inyan klaluso, shu bechinas ha'hepech mamish me bechinas ha'rishimu haniskaleel. At first glance, once we understand that the Kav is nimshach from the Rishimu, so the Mitteler Rebbe says, now we have to call a spade what it is and realize that the Kav is the polar opposite of the Rishimu. We just explain the Rishimu as a point, a quintessential point that holds everything inside of itself, an infinite capacity, but folded into a finite quintessential point. And the Kav is extension, it's hispashtus, it's movement downwards. It's the extension of something, the opposite of a point. Ki hine hanakuda moira ha'he'elem v'histalkus ha'kol ad shelo nishar rak k'nekuda echad. V'gam nekuda oireshem zu moira b'chinas ha'edar ha'hispashtus lamata dafka. When we think about the point of the Rishimu, the Nekudas HaRishimu, the quintessential remainder of infinite light that is contracted back into itself to create the condensing of infinitude so that it doesn't appear in all of its force. That's a point, and a point implies concealment and removal of everything else, to the degree that nothing remains other than the irreducible point that remains. It's the opposite of extension. It is contraction within. And furthermore, the Nakuda, or the Rishimu, or that trace, it points to the fact that there is an absence of extension downwards. Specifically, it's the return inwards. Hainu inyan he'edar ha'hamshacha v'hisgalus la'oirich v'roichev ketzuras hayud she'ein boi toich v'chalal v'chulei kiyadua. Because the point is like the yud, and the yud represents the nothingness that it holds, the immense amounts of nothingness that it holds, but it is the opposite of revelation by way of width or breadth or extension downwards. So the Rishimu, which is an akuda, which is everything contained into a quintessential point, seems to be the opposite of a kav, which is the extension in a ray-like way, which implies descent from above to below. So the point is the Rishimu. V'hine inyan hatzimsum shelo. And when it comes to understanding the nature of the Rishimu, we have to come to understand the nature of the tzimtzum that is taking place within the Rishimu. Because we said that the Rishimu, the Nekudas HaRoishem, is holding two elements of the Tzimtzum. Mitzad Ilah, it's not a real Tzimtzum because everything is still there, and the Rebbe has the ability to recall all information at any given moment, and the potency of vitality can extend itself across any element of the body, and possibility can express itself in any form of possibility. Nothing is lacking mitzad the higher perspective of the Rishimu, other than the fact that everything is contained by way of pure potential prior to actualization. But the potential of actualization is always there. And so when we discuss the tzimtzum of the Rishimu, melamala, from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hainu ma shenishar bebechinas nekulad levad, when we understand the Rishimu, the Nekuda of the Rishimu, from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we could begin to understand how the Kav could come down from there. Why? Because when we talk about the Nekuda of the Rishimu from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yochel lihiyos sheyeh mizeh lehepech, mepnei shemach mazeh yuchlol bo hakol bekitzer v'remez v'chiyai gavna. Sure, from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with the Rishimu, where nothing actually changed other than the shift from pure actualization back into the actualization of potential in its potential form. So from that point, we can imagine how it can reveal itself by way of the opposite, which would be the Kav in its unfolding and extension downwards. Why? Because it's specifically the pointed nature of the Rishimu that points to the fact that it holds everything within it by way of the quintessential essence of it, and by way of a hint. V'chi hagavna, and all of the mashalim that we spoke about. V'adarabba zihu ikar sibas kol hagiloi hahashpoa k'nez galeel. When we're dealing with the Rishimu from the side of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where it's Simsim and Kapshuto, and everything is still revealed there, even though it's contained within the pointed nature, so then obviously we don't have a kasha of how opposites can emerge from that, because it holds everything, and in fact, all emergence is going to be built from that. But what we said is ultimately that the purpose of the Rishimu is to create a distinction between before the Tzimtzum and after the Tzimtzum. And that distinction from before the Tzimtzum and after the Tzimtzum is only mitzidenu from our perspective of the Rishimu, which is that the Rishimu is not identifiable with the absolute infinite nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light. It is one step removed to the degree that a person can no longer return back to the full actualization of absolute infinitude. And so from that perspective, from our perspective of the Rishimu, not from Hashem's perspective, so to speak, of the Rishimu, where it makes sense how all opposites can coalesce, because everything is there. But aval ma shahanakuda zu more he'edar hispashtos legamre lamata, but from the sad that the Nekudas HaRishimu means something for us, and it represents the absence and the privation of full revelation downwards. From our perspective, we see that Simsum as actual. We see that Simsum as absolute. We see that Simsum as a true concealment and a concealing of that light from being revealed down below. The imkain, and if we're dealing with our side of understanding the Rishimu, which is already one step removed, how could it be that from this Nekudas HaRishimu, from our perspective, which is the absencing and the absence of pure revelation, which is the opposite, actually the opposite, literally the opposite of Kav, which means the extension of revelation, because it's the Bechina of Hamshacha and Espashtas HaKav. So how could it be that the Kav is going to come from the Rishimu? How could it possibly be that the emergence of infinitude can return back from our perspective of the Rishimu, which is where the Tzimtzum is Chal? That's the Shaila. And Sakli Heilige Mitteler Rebbe. Achine yadua shebe'emes hanakuda v'hakav einem beis hafachim harei hakav nimshach min hanakuda u'mechiber nakudos yachad na'asakav. So here the Mitteler Rebbe is revealing something very, very teeth. Every part, every word. But the entire question is based on a fallacy. The fallacy is that there's a distinction between the Nekudas HaRishimu from our perspective and the Kav that descends down afterwards. And if we're seeing them as two separate things, and the Kav is reflective of a re-entrance of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu back into the Halal, so then how could it be that that's emerging from the Tzimtzum of the Rishimu, which is the privation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the Halal? But ultimately, what the Mitteler Rebbe is saying is that they're not two separate things. And in truth, everything that bottom point of the Halal, from our perspective, holds is going to express itself in and as the Kav or Ein Sof itself. It is not something separate. It is just an extension of that Nekudas HaRishimu. The Nekudas HaRishimu replicates itself. One point gives birth to another point, gives birth to another point by way of the frictional activism of the Gevuros that are taking shape internally as we learn from the secret of the Kabbalah of Mahari Sarug, as we're going to see in the next Shaar, in the next Perek. But suffice it to say that this Nekudas Harashimu is not some static point, but there's a dynamism at the heart of it, which is coming from the upper point of the Rashimu, which is the fact that Simsum in a Kipshuto, and that really the Rashimu is a full expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light by way of concealment, which enables the concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light to still take on an active role in the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But this Nekuda and the Kav are not two opposite things, but rather the Kav is the emergent process of innumerable Nekudos that are expressing themselves. They're not two opposites. The Kav is drawn out of the Nakuda, and it's from one Nakuda unifying with another Nakuda that populates that which is going to be revealed as a densely populated Kav. That which appears to be the Kav which descends down is nothing other than the reiteration of the Nakuda itself, extending itself downwards. Acha inyan hu kiyadua. The matter is as we understand. Shahanekuda hu kamo bechinas hahiyuli legabe hakav. Hu kamo kol bechinas hiyuli o chomer pashut. Sha'afal pi shehu behe'edar ha'espashtus dafka. Ein sehechrechi klal. Rak mitzad etzem muhus hahiyuli mipnei shehu lemala adayin mebechinas espashtus. Ulezois lo yared ma'atzmuso kamo hiyuli shel chayes hachai begilui ba'idana kolu be'etzem. She'enem espashtet lehachyos. V'chulei. Ukehayuli shal koyach atnua be'etzem terem shetispashtet lahania, v'kekoach hasmicha terem shemispashtet lahatzmiach, ukekoach hasecha terem shemispashtet lahaskil v'chiagavna. So now to just translate and then to explain. The way that we can understand the emergence of the Kav from within the Rishimu itself, from within the Nakuda, is because we know that in truth the Nakuda and the Kav are not two separate things, but rather the Kav emerges from within the Nakuda. Because the matter is that the point operates like a hylic matter, a koyach hahiyuli, pure potential at the revelation of itself, the 0 point of revelation where pure potentiality is revealed, but it's prior to any form. It's pure matter without form. It's something that is oimed lesgala. It's there. The hiyuli is there. It's the emergent point. It's the first expression of tohu vavohu. It's that koyach hiyuli, the hylic state, which can express itself in any which way, but it's prior to any specific revelation, and therefore it's the pure possibility of all revelation. And the fact that this is a Greek word, we know from the tzaddikim, from the Zidichah, where he says that it's Roshei Tevos, Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'ad, the koyach of the hiyuli, prior to any definition. The point is like the hiyuli, which is just possibility prior to revelation, but it doesn't mean that it can't reveal itself. It's just not yet revealed. And in relationship to the kav, this nekudas hahiyuli, this hylic potential prior to manifestation, is almost like a pure possibility, pure simplicity. That even though the absence of this pure possibility is not fundamental to the possibility, because it's just happens to be that it hasn't revealed itself yet. It's not that it can't reveal itself, it's just that it hasn't yet revealed itself. And if the absence of revelation is not a fundamental feature of that nakuda, but rather a secondary aspect of the way that we're orienting ourselves to it, it's not necessary that that nakuda of the Rishimu can't extend itself downwards. It's just that at this point, it's prior to revelation downwards. And that's why it has not yet emerged out of its essence. Just like the hylic material or the hylic vitality of potential within the self or within possibility prior to revelation, when it's still contained within the essence, that it's not yet revealed yet in order to give life. This hylic possibility of the potential of movement prior to the actualization of movement, that's what the nakuda is. It's the possibility of growth prior to actual growth. It's pure possibility prior to revelation. So the kasha is, how does the kav come out of the nakuda? The nakuda is not by definition something that is not extended. It's just not yet extended. The kav is the extension of the nakuda. How could the nakuda of the Rishimu, which is the tzimtzum, extend itself outwards? And what we're going to see is that because ultimately the nakuda sarashimu draws down a light of the essence prior to the tzimtzum. And because the nakuda sarashimu, from our perspective, contains a trace of the Nekudas Harashimu from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, so that the secret of Tzimtzum Ein Kipshuto folds itself into the reality of living as if Tzimtzum is Kipshuto. That means within the perspective of as if Tzimtzum is Kipshuto, we can still draw out the possibility and the reality of Tzimtzum Ein Kipshuto, and because of that, the reality of the Nekudas Harashimu from our perspective, which is apparently devoid of expression, That just means that it has not yet been revealed in its extension downward. But the kav is the continuation of that nekudas harashimu, which is drawing that hylic potential of revelation down into actualization. And the difference between pure possibility of the hylic material and the utilization of that hylic material into a particular form is not a difference in kind, it's a difference in type, meaning to say they're not two separate things. They both contain the residual essence of the essential light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude. And therefore, it should not come as a surprise as when we see that there is a fell swoop of unity that is going on between all of these stages. There's many, many mushals to explain this. The relationship of pre-actualization and post-actualization, and the secret revelation that really in truth, they're both reflective of the same thing. They're both reflective of the same thing. So the Mitteler Rebbe continues that Harayuvan shehahedar hahispashtus hazois loy nikrat simsum amiti mitzad atzmo. Adarabba, harehu koach hahiyuli ha'atzmi shemimenu nimtza hakol behiskalus ubehispashtis ubechiyah gavna. So the real way that we have to look at the nekudas hatzimtzum, the nekudas harashimu, is that the absence of its extension downwards is not an actual absence of its possibility of being extended downwards, as if it lacked the capacity in and of itself to extend downwards. Adarabba, the opposite is true. This pure potential of the hiyuli, ha'atzmi, the essential possibility that is revealed in the nekudas harashimu, it's from there that all revelation and all extension is going to be revealed afterwards. Ubechiyai gavna yuvan bechinas nekuda lagabe hakav. And it's this relationship that we have to bring to our comparison and our understanding of the emergence of the kav, which is extension of infinite light, from within the nekuda, which is seemingly the concealment of infinite light. Shehahedar haespashtis hurak mitzad hayoise bebechinas ha'atzmius shelamala bebechinas haespashtis adayin. That the only distinction between the nekuda and the kav is that the nekuda operates in its essential form, which is above the point of revelation downwards yet. Hagam sheba'a ayedei tzimtzum hakol ad shelo nisharak kenekuda achad. Even though the Rishimu is already posted Tzimtzum in the sense that all of the essential potency is revealed within it, that doesn't mean that it's subject to revelation downwards yet. It just means that it's the pure possibility of revelation downwards, which means that all eventual revelation is going to be an unfolding of that pure possibility of revelation, which is contained within the Nakuda of the Rishimu. And so the relationship between the Nakuda and the Kav is not one of absolute difference, but one of a difference in time on the map of revelation. That the Nekuda is prior to the revelation downwards, and the Kav is after that process of the revelation downwards. The very simple fact that the Rishimu is ultimately emergent from within, a collapsing and a contraction of all of the etzem of the Or Ein Sof into that point of containing itself, that points to the fact that everything is contained within it, and everything that's going to emerge is going to emerge from within that place. And it's for that reason that it's not extended downwards. Just like a student who they're in front of their rabbi, in front of their teacher. In the moment that the student comes to the tzaddik, so their mind is completely in a state of receptivity. And when something is in a state of receptivity completely and it's receiving everything, it can't then turn back and extend downwards. In a time that something is saturated, it cannot share downwards. And so when the Talmud comes to the Rebbe, the Talmud is no longer able to be mashpia lamata to the Talmidim of the Talmud, because at the point that the Talmud comes to the Rebbe, the Talmud is receiving everything. This is the mashal of the Nekudas Harashimu. The Nekudas Harashimu is not extending downwards, not because it doesn't have what to extend downwards, but rather because it's processing and receiving everything that is going to eventually be received downwards. It's like the student who, when they come to their Rebbe, they turn away from the act of hashpa'ah, so as to enable the process of hashpa'ah afterwards. So too, by the Nekudas Harashimu, the absence of its extension downwards is not by definition an essential nature of the Nekudas Harashimu. Adrabah, Ipra Mistabra, all emergence of the Kav comes to the Nekudas Harashimu. It's just that when it's operant in the mindset of, in the guise of the Nekudas Harashimu, it's still just receiving all of the intensity and the essence of the infinite light, Kavyachol. And it's only when it enters into the nature of the kav, which is the drawing down of that infinite light. And the radical secret of the kav is that even when it turns downwards to extend itself, it never loses itself. It never loses that pure orientation and relationship with the absolute essence of the light. Meaning to say that when the Talmud comes in front of their Rebbe, the ID the Torah lemivel avinasa kanakuda b'tzimtzum kol atzmusa v'chule v'loy palit. That in the moment that a person is by their Rebbe and the mind is attached and the mind is bothered in the degree that it's bothered with trying to saturate and soak up every ounce of it, so then the mind of the Talmud becomes like a point that doesn't express itself whatsoever, and it doesn't have the ability to share or be mashpia to somebody else, behispashtus. Amnan acher kabal so ader abba mizat simsum shia b'chinas nekudu nimshach mimena kol hashpah v'hispashtus l'zloso. But once the student is done receiving from the Rebbe and it's done being in the guise of the Nekudas Harashimu, and it turns into the mindset of extending itself downwards in the secret of the Kav, Adarabba, that pointed nature of the Nekudas Harashimu doesn't point to the absence of extension, it is the very site of extension itself. Like the Talmud who, once they leave their Rebbe, can now go and share what they've received from the light of their Rebbe with the Talmidim of them. As we explained elsewhere. And from all of this, Yuvan Shahakav Hanimshach min Anakuda, Hurak Kemoi Bechinas Espashtus min Hiyuli Ha'atzmi. With all of this, we can understand that the kav, the extension of the infinite light, back into conversation, back into the sugya, drawing this back into the system. It's not different than the Nekudas Harashimu, which is the impossibility of a system. Because the Nekudas Harashimu is the secret of the beginning of the system, which has to feel like there's an impossibility of a system emerging, because it's still holding all of that infinite light. But then the gradations of Tzimtzum dictate that once one level of concealment takes shape, another level of concealment can take shape, so that there can be a full expression of Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Lios Ladir B'Tachtonim. And the Nekuda gives way to a Kav. And then the Kav gives way to something even more Mesubach, which is going to be the Shetach. This Nekuda Kav Shetach, this point, this ray, and this territory is what the Yud is. The Yud is the point, the Vav of the Yud is the extension downwards, and the Dalid of the Yud is the full expression of the shape and possibility, which is going to take shape as a result of the Kav. What we're learning in Ijra Rabbah from the Ramchal in the Adir Bamarom is that ultimately the Kav, or Ein Sof, expresses itself within the world of Adam Kadmon. And that's where we begin to speak about the Seder HaInyanim. The Seder HaInyanim is the Shetach. That's when it's going to be described in the world of Adam Kadmon. When we talk about the Hotza'as of the Orus of Adam Kadmon, there's three Makomos. There's the Shiboiles, there's the Tabor, and there's the Chazeh. All of those spell Shetach. Shetach is the extension and the space. But the Yud is the Nekudas Harashimu, which, because it's the Nekudas Harashimu, is still operant in a form of Tzimtzum, but that's not because it's essentially Mitzumtzum, but that's because it's receiving, and it's that point of convergence between absolute infinitude of the light and the processing of the infinite light in a territory of finitude, where the infinite nature of the light still maintains itself within the shape of finitude, which is the secret of Koyach HaGvul Bebilti Gvul, the radical paradox of all paradoxes. This takes shape ever so slightly by way of the emergence of the Yud, the Vav, the Dalid, the point, the ray, and the extension of the territory. And so now the Mitteler Rebbe has explained to us. So we understand now how the Kav is emergent from the Nekuda itself. And even though the Nekuda is just a point, as if it's built the Espashtus, the Kav is just the extension of that point from within that pure Heilig possibility and potential. But the Kav, because it's one layer removed from the Nekudas Harashimu, which is one layer removed from Or Ein Sof Koydam Ad Simsum, so too, the Kav is now going to give birth and allow for a furthering of a revelation, which is going to be one step removed from the Kav, which is going to be the Shetach that we just spoke about. Amnan, says the Mitteler Rebbe, Masha Nimshach Bechinas Kav Katzer. But here we see a new level of the tzimtzum that the Kav brings into the picture. The Nekudas Harashimu is not katzer. It's mitzumsum. It's a quintessential potency of all things that are contained within the quintessential drop, and the secretion of all that contains the all. That's nuclear in its nature. That's not a minimization. That's a containment. But minimization, the Kav katzer, the fact that we're now beginning to speak of the dimensions of revelation, the shape of revelation, the measure of revelation. The Nekudas Harashimu is not measure. It's pure possibility prior to any measure. But the emergence of the Kav is already going to be referred to as the Kav Hamida, as the Butzina de Kardinusa, as the gradational revelation of shape and form that is now going to become the vessel that reveals the infinite ray of light. And here is already another question, because how do we see that the beginning of the minimization of the infinite light that is expressed through the Kav, how does that begin to emerge? Because that's not found by the Nekudas Harashimu. So that's the shaila that the Mitteler Rebbe is asking. He says, now that we understand that the Kav emerges from the Nekuda, like expression that emerges from pure possibility. So the question we now have to ask is, how is it possible that this Kav that is coming from the Nekudas Harashimu can emerge by way of Kitsira, by way of a real, actual shortening or narrowing? We've explained elsewhere. But it's like we just said, just as we explained that in relationship to the Kav, the Nekudas Harashimu is as if it's not in existence whatsoever because it's pure possibility. So too, in relationship to the Shetach, the Kav operates that point. Every level comes from a level above it. And every level that level comes from is going to be considered as hiyuli. So if the Nekudas Harashimu is the source of the Kav, so then in relationship to the Kav, the Nekudas hiyuli of the Rishimu is going to be pure potential. But the same relationship, Kav Yachol, is going to take place as well on a lower level, that if the Kav is the pure possibility prior to the Shetach, to the emergence of that possibility into actual measurement, rather than just revelation, but rather revelation within measurement. So the Kav is also pure potentiality in relationship to the Shetach, which is the Oirich, the Roichev, the extension of width and length and the beginning of that Shetach of Adam Kadmon and the territory of worlds, where there begins to be the possibility of emergence of something different. Because it's also clear that even though we know we just spent so much time saying that the Kav emerges from the Nekudas Harashimu by way of Hamshacha and an extension downwards and a drawing out and an extending down from above to below. The Kav does not yet reveal any way in which the light is coming down from above to below. It doesn't define the particularities of revelation of the infinite within the finite, but rather it reveals the actual revelation of infinitude within the finite, the koyach hagvul bebilti gvul, pure hope. It's not an emotion. It's the fabric of self. The kav is the secret of hope, and so it's prior to any definition of specificity. It's emergence, as opposed to the Nekudas Harashimu, which was concealment. So there's concealment, and then the emergence from within concealment, and then emergence from within concealment begins to take shape, and that's what the shetach is going to be. Nimsa b'chinas ma'ala v'mata. What the Kav reveals to us is that there's above and below now, as the Eitz Chaim tells us that the Kav reveals above and below, meaning to say that there's a mashpia el makabel. There's something that is giving over from above and something that is receiving from below. Masha'ein came behiyuli de nekuda, which we don't have by the Nekudas Harashimu, because it's prior to a makabel. Ein bo ma'ala mata reish toich sof. It doesn't have the beginning of gradations. But nevertheless, even though the Kav is the beginning of gradation, it doesn't define the nature of gradation. It's just the emergence of the possibility of gradation, as is known. Or meaning this is exactly what the Eitz Chaim says, that the Kav is just there to create the possibility of above and below, but it's still prior to the shape and the width and the length and the definition and the differentiation of the shetach, which is the dalit of the yud. Commercial emes habinyan she'ena ba begeder shetach habinyan atzma l'oirich l'roichev rak shabay moided kol medidas oirich v'chol medidas roichev. It's like the foundation of a building, which does not express itself across the full width and length of the building that is going to be built afterwards, because that's the extension from the foundation. But the foundation is the very source of the measurement and the very source of the beginning of the measurements and where those measurements are going to emerge from. And it carries itself within every element of the measurement. It's the medidas oirech and the medidas of the roichev. It's the measuring of the length and measuring of the width. The kav contains all possibilities of eventual emergence into particular midos. Kach tziur hakav bechinas hiyuli. So too the kav is nechshav as the pure potential of the foundation that is prior to any measurement, but pure possibility of measurement beyond measure. L'gabe bechina shetach. That's how it operates in accordance to the next level of revelation, which is the shetach ha'usios la'asos ba'oirech v'roichev. How the letters actually begin to congeal and extend one point from another to give shape to something. In the aspect of the kavim and the osbeis, which is now we're going to have an upper, a lower, and a middle. That's all after the kav. There's the yud, which is the nakuda. Then there's the vav of the yud, which is the kav, that is drawn down from above to below. Then there's the dalid, which is going to be the four directions of it. But it's one fell process of the nakuda sarishimu, the kav, and then the shetach. As we explained elsewhere. Ulafizeh says the Mitteler Rebbe, gam reishes hamshachas kav min nakuda. So we now understand that the beginning of the emergence of the kav, which is the second stage, the vav, that extends from the nakuda, hagam shuh baba b'chinas espashtus v'hamshach. Yes, it's an extension from above to below. It's still a hylic form of extension downwards, where it's prior to measurement and prior to extension into particulars. That it has all the possibility of all the possible measure that's going to take shape afterwards. And that's why the kav is referred to as the kav hamida. It's the emergence, it's the measuring rod, it's the emergence of possibility of measure. And this is the shape of the kav. It's a very thin, fine dak shebedak that extends itself from above to below. That's all it does. It doesn't extend outwards. It's not thick. But nevertheless, the kav draws down within its concealment and its hylic nature in relationship to that which is going to emerge afterwards. In the secret of the shetach, it contains all the possibility that is contained within that hylic point of the Nekuda Sarashimu, v'chule, rak sheba ba'oifen hamshacha lamata, except that now it's extended downwards. V'huba mikoyach or ha'atzmi ha'ne'elam sheba'atzmas ha'mashpia shelofnei tzimtzuma b'nekuda aleph. And what it's drawing down from is that light of the mashpia even prior to the tzimtzum into the Nekuda Sarashimu. Rak sheba derech kav, now it's drawing everything down, levad, v'lo kemoshu ba'atzmas ha'mashpia. It's no longer in the essential pointed nature of the mind of the mashpia, where everything is contained within the Nekuda Sarashimu and that dotted pointed nature. Rather, now it's extended. Now it's the possibility of ideas, which is the extending of the possibility of the value of that essential point that exists inside. And this is the kav that now enables that light of essentiality that is hidden within the Nekuda Sarashimu, which is the revelation of the fact that Simsam Ena Kipshuto is revealed within the perspective of Simsam Kipshuto Mitzidenu. So the ore of the Atzmus is being drawn down in accordance with the vessels, levad. That's the secret of the Tzimtzum, so that now we have the capacity of being vessels that can hold the light. Aval im kol zeh, but nevertheless, in spite of the fact that it's measured and it's minimized and it's contained and it doesn't appear to hold everything at once, nevertheless, hare yesh by me'ein v'dugmas or ha'atzmus hanelim nekuda. Nevertheless, it still contains a residual effect and a residual remnant, and we understand that when we talk about essence, when we say that the residual remnant of essential infinite light, that means that within the irreducible remnant is still that pointed nature of that light. It's just now hidden by way of extending downwards. There was an implicit order, and now it extends outwards and it reveals itself in revelation. Imkain babatzir kav. That's why it appears as a ray, and it's the bechina of the hiyuli l'chol or shefa hamakablim v'chule v'dailamevin. And it's the revelation of all of the forms of light that are eventually going to be revealed down below. And that is enough for one who understands. And we're going to see in Parak Tasvav, V'mirtz Hashem, how this yud extends itself across these 3 points. The Nekudas Harashimu of the yud, the vav is the kav that extends itself from the Nekudas Harashimu, and the dalit is the dalit ruchos ha'olam, which are going to be the shetach, be'ezras Hashem. But all of this is to show us how infinitude is folded into every ounce of measurement, and measurement doesn't stop holding itself. Measurement has the capacity to contain its measure, in spite of the fact that it holds something immeasurable within it. Be'ezras Hashem.